I heard it with my own ears. How is she still alive? The laughter that followed wasn't loud, just sharp enough to cut into my ribs. I stood behind the wooden gate with a warm peach pie pressed to my palm. I could have turned back, but I didn't. I pushed the latch and walked into the backyard like a shoe-wearing ghost. String lights flickered, paper plates warped. Faces moved careful not to touch mine. Someone raised a glass to toast the family, and the glasses clinked like little hammers. I kept breathing. Sugar and lemongrass mingled in the air while I searched for a place to set down my plate and my heart. No one took it. A chair groaned when I sat. Children scurried past the way people do when they've heard a story about you. I smoothed my skirt, lifted my chin, and smiled at a table that did not see me. I heard the sentence again, quieter this time, as if the echo wanted privacy. I let it live where it landed. I did not rise. I did not run. I kept the pie level, the breath, even the spine straight. The lights kept trembling. The plates kept bending. The faces kept moving. I tasted metal and sugar. I tasted the decision forming. It pressed against my tongue and then settled behind my ribs exactly where the cut had started. I counted 1, 2, 3, and did nothing anyone could name. I sat there present as furniture steady as a fence post, and I waited for the noise to spend itself. The toast died. The laughter thinned. My pulse did not. I placed my hand flat on the warm glass, felt heat. Answer heat, and understood that quiet does not mean small. Quiet can be a blade turned inward until it reaches the handle. Then I made a decision no one could hear, not yet. Anyway. They lifted plastic cups and said, "To family," and somehow the word skipped right over me. I'm Grace Whitaker, mother, grandmother, good with ovens and hard seasons. I stood there with a warm dish and a colder welcome. The kind of silence older women know too well. You set the table, then someone forgets to set a place for you. My son Dan laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. My daughter-in-law Ashley arranged napkins like I was part of the decor. It's funny how a backyard can feel like an airport terminal. People in motion, nobody arriving for you. I started stacking plates, wiping sticky rings from the wood. Doing what I do best, making myself useful, until usefulness became invisibility. The string lights blinked like a signal I kept missing. When the chairs scraped and no one turned, I felt something small and sturdy click into place. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. I made a decision and carried it home. The next morning, my old kettle sang like it always does, a reliable voice in a quiet house. Sunlight slid across the table where Dan once did math worksheets. Legs too long for the chair pencil teeth marks along the edges. Back then, every mom meant I mattered. Lately, mom sounded like a job title they assumed I'd keep without pay or thanks. I rinsed the coffee cup Frank favored my husband, who believed in fixing what could be fixed, and let the warm water sit in my hands. People think loneliness is loud. It's not. It's the soft thud of mail, the way you talk yourself into staying small. I looked around my kitchen, spices lined like soldiers. The good measuring cups heavy with memory, and realized something simple and difficult. I had become tolerated instead of treasured. The thought didn't break me. It steadied me. I dried my hands, walked to the hall cabinet, and reached for the file box that knows the truth. I set the file down like a loaf just out of the oven, careful hot with history. Inside the purchase agreement, the deed, the letter I wrote when I pulled $40,000 from my retirement. Because you are my son, I had signed in a hopeful hand. That sentence met me like an old friend who forgot my birthday for 10 straight years. I didn't need a calculator. I needed clarity. Paper doesn't lie. It doesn't say, "We didn't know you were coming," while it uses your gift as a foundation. I traced the ink, remembering the day we celebrated his keys. How he hugged me, how I told myself generosity was a bridge you never regret building. I still believe that. I just forgot to build a gate. My heart didn't race. My palms didn't sweat. The truth doesn't always thunder. Sometimes it taps your shoulder and says, "Look." I closed the folder and picked up the phone. bring everything Sandra said. Voice clean as lemon polish. We met years ago at a bridge table. She reads probate papers the way some people read poetry, watching for where the line breaks. In her living room, we spread the documents like a map on a dining table. "You can't take the house back," she said. "No sugar in it, but you can take your power." Then she handed me a list revoke. The power of attorney, update the will, lock down accounts, pick witnesses who look you in the eyes. It wasn't a sermon, it was a recipe. I've always trusted those. As she talked, I saw it my life had been simmering on a back burner, polite and unattended. She slid me a pen. "Start with your name," she said. I wrote it in a firm hand, first proof that I wasn't fading. When I left, the air outside felt newer than the calendar. I didn't float. I stood up straighter. That night, I took out my old address book, the one with yellowed tabs and ink that remembers. Under D, I found Dan Whitaker written 3 ways home. Sell the number that never answers. My hand shook for a moment, not from weakness, but from weight. Then I drew a single black line through his name. It didn't erase him. It testified to me. People think boundaries arrive with a bang. Mine arrived like a ruler, laid along a page, straight, simple, undeniable. I added a new entry, Sandra Park Estate Mentor, because every subtraction deserves a sturdy addition. The house settled around me, familiar and finally honest. I turned off the lamp and stood at the window, listening to the kind of quiet that doesn't feel like punishment. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and went back to sleep. I did the same with a spine made of ink and a future that had just made room. In the morning, I baked blueberry pie, the way my hands remember cold butter-patient wrists, a little lemon zest, because life should brighten when it can. For years, I arrived carrying dessert, like a ticket that proved I belonged. Today, the ticket was mine. I set the pie to cool on the porch, wrapped my knees in the old Afghan, and watched steam lift like a small prayer. An older neighbor once told me, grief changes the way sugar tastes. Maybe, but this slice eaten with a regular fork on an ordinary Tuesday tasted like permission. Between bites, I made a small inventory, what stays, what goes, what was never mine to carry. I thought of Frank tapping the counter, saying sweetness is a choice. He was right. I poured tea, cut another small piece, and laughed at nothing in particular. Somewhere a mower started, somewhere a life did too. Mine. The second slice tasted like proof. Around 4, I saw Ashley's sister, Michelle Carter, pull up to the shiny house my money once helped anchor. She walked in without knocking, confidence swinging from her elbow with the tote bag. I wasn't jealous of her certainty. I was finished being surprised by it. You taught them how to treat you, people like to say. Maybe I did. Maybe I taught with casseroles, and quiet thinking kindness would translate into a chair with my name on it. That driveway looked like a decision I had funded but never entered. The porch light blinked awake, though the sun was still up. Timers plans a rhythm that didn't include me. A breeze carried the smell of charcoal and new paint. I held the rail steady as a fence post and imagined a different front door, a key that turned because I turned it. Not because someone finally remembered. My heart didn't shrink, it aimed. I went inside and reached for a paper bag. In the hallway, there's a shallow drawer where I've kept stickers, pens, with glitter ink. Tiny notebooks. Treasures saved for Emma, my granddaughter, who used to press her palm against mine and compare. I opened the drawer to habit and found a museum of waiting. The truth sat there. You can love a child without being invited to the table that names you. I packed the stickers, the tiny journals, even the silly erasers shaped like fruit, into a brown paper bag. Not angry, clear. I set the bag beside the recycling, a soft little thud that sounded like a clock starting over. The empty drawer didn't echo. It breathed. I slid it closed and stood there long enough to feel something shift from ache to choice. If I wasn't needed, I would stop rehearsing my usefulness. I checked the porch bag, still there, world still turning. Good. Some goodbyes are small and honest. This one freed an hour I was ready to spend. That evening, Dan sent a message that read like a shrug. Ashley says if she upset you, she's sorry. Family events are tiring. I didn't reply. I deleted it the way you dust a shelf and refuse to polish the same spot forever. A knock came at 7K Miller from next door, hair in a clip holding a container of lentil soup like it was winter medicine. "You got a minute?" she asked already. Inside already, kind, we split the last of my pie and traded small stories her missing cat. My stubborn hedge, nothing dramatic, everything real. At one point, she took a bite and said, "This is so good. My knees are humming." We laughed the kind of laugh that oils a rusted hinge. When she left, I washed 2 forks and looked at the clean sink, the clean phone screen, the clean space inside my chest. Not empty, ready. Tomorrow I would make the next call. Tonight I slept like a house that finally locked its own door. Sandra slid reading glasses down her nose and lined my papers like measuring cups. Power of attorney here, well there. A neat stack of proofs that I'd been generous and unguarded. "We're not taking anything back," she said, voice calm as a metronome. "We're taking you back," I nodded. Revenge burns hot and fast. Repair holds steady heat. We filled out the revocation, my name in ink that didn't wobble. The printer coughed. The notary stamp landed with a soft, holy thud. I imagined 100 small times I'd swallowed questions to keep the peace, and felt a different peace arrive, one that didn't require me to disappear. Sandra poured peppermint tea, the kind older hands keep for nerves and company. "You're doing the adult thing," she said, smiling. "You're being the adult for yourself." I signed the last page and breathed in the lemon-clean smell of a room where women finish what they start. That stamp wasn't noisy. It was final. Next file, the will. Sandra's cursor hovered over executor like a doctor above a tender place. "You can choose anyone," she said, "especially someone who sees you." I thought about waiting rooms where I brought cookies and left with crumbs of attention. I thought about holidays where chairs hugged centerpieces while I perched at the edge. "Not family?" she asked gently. "Not for this," I answered steady. We deleted a name that had become a habit and typed professional fiduciary TBD. A quiet relief spread across my shoulders, the way a warm towel does at the dentist, strange comforting necessary. We scrolled to beneficiaries. I stopped pretending the future would teach gratitude where it hadn't taught presence. A will is a map. Mine had been drawn by wishful thinking. We redrew it by light I could trust. When we saved the changes, the computer chimed. Small sound, big shift. My life stopped being an open bar and became a guest list. At home, I set the folder beside Frank's old letter, the one that says, "Stay open, but don't hand yourself away." He wrote it before a surgery he didn't outlive. Grief makes paper heavier. I ran a finger along his scrawl and felt married again, not to a man this time, but to my own backbone. I opened the address book and gave Sandra a proper place under S. Then I added a new card, Lindell Charles Trust. The desk lamp hummed the way houses do when they're finally listening. I thought about the way older women learn to leave the porch light on for everyone but themselves. Not tonight. I turned it off on purpose, the room going soft and honest. I set the pen down the way you place a knife back in the drawer after cutting fruit cleaned useful safe. On the way to bed, I caught myself smiling at the hallway mirror, not at my reflection, at my resolve. The locksmith arrived before the coffee. Cooled a young man with polite hands and shoes that didn't track in dirt. He didn't ask why. He didn't need the story. He worked front door first, then the back, then the little key that used to stick unless you jiggled it like a bad habit. The metal clicked into place with a sound I want played at my funeral simple closure. I made 4 copies like Sandra suggested, one for my purse, one for the fireproof box, one for Kay next door, one for the bank box that smells like old pennies and quiet. When he left, I turned the deadbolt myself and felt the difference in my palm. That night, sleep came like a dignified guest, no sneaking in, no apologies. I didn't dream about being late or lost. I didn't wake checking my phone for crumbs of consideration. The house settled. So did I. Boundaries, it turns out, sound like a lock saying yes to you. Banks smell like printer. Warm and carpet old, Trina Coleman had a plant on her desk, a pothos that knew how to survive dim light and neglect. We started with access. Remove the authorized user, cancel the extra card, reset. Every question to answers only, I would know. Mother's maiden name, she asked. No, I smiled. I'll pick better locks than that. We added two-factor like a sensible pair of shoes. Trina typed with a rhythm that felt like somebody keeping pace beside me, not ahead, not behind. When she pushed the form across my signature, didn't plead. It declared. Anything else, she asked. I looked at the pothos trailing toward the floor, a green ribbon refusing to give up. Let's put alerts in place, I said, and let's make in-person mean something again. She nodded, printing confirmations that curled in the tray like fresh receipts for a life I was finally itemizing. I left lighter, not smaller. Trina mentioned trusts and alerts we hadn't set yet, offered to call someone right then. I shook my head not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't. I'm building the next version of my life, I said, and I want the frame square. Older adults know about rushing you. Hurry casseroles to ovens, hurrying children to practices, hurrying yourself to last. Not anymore. We scheduled follow-ups, the kind that live on calendars and show up like polite guests. I initialed one more form, a clean stroke that felt like sweeping the porch before dawn. On the way out, I noticed the poster about fraud, how strangers pose as kin. I smiled at the irony. The phone vibrated with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. The world can wait when you're finally on your own time. I stepped into afternoon light keys, talking softly in my purse, a sound like wind chimes deciding which way is home. Back at the fireproof box, I pulled files that smell like basements and certainty. The deed, insurance, the envelope with birth certificates, mine his. I didn't rip anything. I refiled. Dan's moved to a folder labeled History Not Future, because words matter in drawers as much as they do in mouths. I kept my hands slow like shelling peas on a porch where the stories don't need to impress anybody. The box gave a little sigh when I closed it. Or maybe that was me. I've learned that love and documentation can live in separate places without canceling each other. I slid the box back onto the shelf where the quilts used to sit and felt an old ache step aside. For an older wisdom, you can honor what was and still refuse to mortgage what's next. In the kitchen, the kettle rattled its lid, impatient little drummer. I poured hot water over a tea bag and toasted the word boundaries. Kay knocked like always, 3 taps and a pause, and came in with banana muffins and a question about a gray cat living under her porch. We named him Vernon for no reason, except that names make it easier to care. We drank coffee that tasted like second chances and read the Sunday paper. That's when I saw the listing Willow View Unit 1B ground floor washer and dryer included. The kind of place older knees appreciate and older hearts can fill. I clipped it with the kitchen scissors I've had longer than some friendships and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. People think leaving means running. Sometimes it means aiming. Kay pointed to the photo brick buildings, tidy beds of flowers, and said, "Looks quiet." I nodded. Quiet used to scare me. Now it sounded like space. We split a muffin. Vernon watched from somewhere we couldn't see. We promised to look for him after lunch. I spread papers across the dining table like a quilt deed. Here tax records there, receipts for roofs and pipes nobody sees until they fail. A folder labeled Repairs held 20 years of decisions I'd made while others assumed I was available on demand. There's a peculiar strength in tidy stacks. I dialed the number Sandra gave me. Charles Lindell, a calm voice, answered a man who sounded like he's seen every storm and still waters plants. We set an appointment for Thursday, bring everything he said echoing Sandra without knowing her. I looked at my piles and didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt equipped. Older adults learn to keep proof because memory gets talked over. I grabbed sticky notes labeled each stack like I was captioning family photos, roof, plumbing, furnace. I paid for it anyway. When I pushed the chairs in the room looked ready. So was I. The plan wasn't dramatic. It was airtight. The phone lit with a number I didn't know, but the voice was familiar, polished a little too bright. "We're worried," Ashley said, listing off words like she was reading the back of a cereal box. Concern, confusion, family. My silence used to apologize for itself. "Not today. I can't talk right now," I said, and let the line go quiet. The machine blinked, recording a message that would not be replayed. I set the handset down and noticed my hands were steady, the way they are when you carry soup across a carpet you don't want to stain. I washed a plate, dried it, and slid it into its place, as if demonstrating how boundaries work. Clean, dry where they belong. Outside, a delivery truck exhaled at the curb. Inside, I refused to be an airbag for someone else's speeding. I wrote Thursday on a sticky note and smiled at my handwriting legible grown mine. Charles's office had the quiet of a library and the friendliness of a good hardware store. He listened without interrupting, that rare courtesy older women keep a running tally of in their heads. "A living trust," he said, drawing a box and arrows on a yellow pad. "You as trustee now, your wishes when you're gone." It felt less like law and more like someone building shelves that won't sag. I told him what I wanted: no family access, no guesswork, clear lines that hold under pressure. He nodded and translated my life into clauses. "We can notarize in-house," he added. I signed where he pointed, reading every line like a recipe card you plan to use again. He handed me a slim binder. "Keep this safe. We'll file the rest." The cover said trust packet, but in my hands it felt like a backbone. I walked out taller, not visibly, but in the places that carry you. Before I left, Charles asked, "And the beneficiary?" The answer arrived with no wobble: Greenway Women's Shelter, immediately from sale. His pen paused, then moved. I didn't owe him the story, but I gave him a line. "They kept me once, long before the house and the holidays." He didn't pry. He checked boxes, set contingencies, made sure the numbers would travel where the intention lived. There's a kind of giving that waits for applause. This wasn't that. This was oxygen routed to a room that knows how to use it. We reviewed the checklist until it looked like a road I'd already walked. He slid over the final signature page. I signed it with the same steadiness I used to frost a cake. Even no showy swirls, all-purpose. Walking to my car, the binder tucked against my ribs, I felt the question from the backyard dissolve. Why am I still alive? To direct the light. And I just did. He knocked the way people do when they assume you'll smooth it over. I stood a few steps back from the door, watching his shadow move across the frosted glass. Once that shape meant help carrying groceries, a hug a mom, you got a minute. Now it sounded like a meeting I didn't schedule. Older women are told silence is surrender. Mine wasn't. It was a sentence with a period. I kept my breath slow and even, like cooling a cake so it sets right. He tried the knob out of habit. New locks, new terms. A car rolled by. The mail truck sighed. The neighborhood went on unfazed. People think motherly equals meek. It doesn't. It means you know when to stop cushioning other people from their own weight. After a while, footsteps retreated down the steps. I didn't chase them. I poured water for tea and let the kettle call my name, not his. Boundary kept. Lesson begun. I started in the hallway and worked room by room the way you weed. A garden, slow, steady, no apologies. 3 boxes, 3 choices. Keep things that hold me up. Frank's measuring cups, the quilt that warms and forgives. Donate good items that don't carry me forward. Extra frames the vase that remembers dust better than flowers. Do not open yet. Tender pieces that need time to land the note. A nurse slipped me the playbill from a night I thought would save us. I labeled each box in clear block letters like instructions to a future self who refuses to get lost. I didn't narrate my decisions to anyone. I kept the talk simple and the movement honest. Older adults know this rhythm. We folded lifetimes into cardboard and tape. By noon, the floor showed itself again. The house looked relieved, as if it had been waiting for me to choose. I wiped the table and chose myself again. In his old room, the sailboat curtains still hung where I'd promised to replace them. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the backyard apple tree, pulled left by years of wind but blooming anyway. That tree is a stubborn teacher, crooked still generous. Once he got stuck halfway up all knees and panic. I ran out barefoot ladder, banging my shins, and brought him down to earth. Don't tell anyone, he said, and I never did. Memory is a faithful accomplice. It hides and it carries. I opened the closet, found a shoebox labeled private, and left it closed. Not everything needs a second look to be honored. An apple thudded to the ground like a clock striking. I stood and wrote on a small notepad, "Leave the curtains, take the quilt." I couldn't fix the lean in that tree, or in other places, but I could decide what still deserved my hands. In the kitchen, I reached for Frank's anniversary gift, measuring cups that feel like anchors in the palm. Cheap ones rattle and bend, these hold. I wrapped each in brown paper, taped the seams like I was tucking in a child for sleep. Some tools teach you how to stand. Frank used to say, half a grin and a hand on my back. I slid the bundle into the keep box and felt my shoulders drop an inch in relief. The drawers sang a different song. As I cleaned them, no clatter, just space. I tossed a cracked spatula that had cut cookies crooked for 5 holidays too many. We tolerate what we think we deserve, right down to the plastic we keep. The trash bag puffed like a small exhale. I wiped the counter in slow circles until the cloth came away clean. Then I set the kettle on and told myself out loud, "You stay. You're worth the sturdy things." I dialed the number from the clipped ad, expecting a maze. Instead, Teresa answered like we were neighbors, meeting over a shared fence. "Willow View, this is Teresa." Warm voice, clear edges. I told her I wanted to see Unit 1B. "Ground floor, good light," she said, "and quiet." We like quiet. Older knees understand ground floors. Older hearts understand quiet that doesn't punish. She offered a Tuesday afternoon slot. "That works," I said, surprised by how ready the word felt in my mouth. After I hung up, I stood on the porch and looked at the brick columns across the street, the flower bed I'd planted and replanted through droughts and rain. I wasn't running. I was orienting. Teresa texted a short checklist: ID, deposit info, comfortable shoes. I smiled at that last one. Comfortable shoes have carried me farther than permission ever did. I circled Tuesday on the calendar and underlined it twice. The hall smelled like new paint and lemon. Teresa's key turned with a bright click, and there it was, 1B. South-facing windows, floors that didn't groan, a kitchen that wasn't fancy but told the truth. No marble pretending to be mercy. Just counter space and a stove with 4 honest burners. I walked in slow, palm flat on the laminate, testing for the story of the place. Neighbors are mostly teachers and retirees, Teresa said, like she knew my language. The bedroom had room for a bed and a chair. The reading kind, not the waiting kind. The bathroom held a grab bar that said, "Somebody thinks ahead." I stood in the doorway and felt my shoulders do that quiet drop they do when you finally stop bracing. "Do you want to think about it?" Teresa asked. "I already have," I said. "Signing would come later." The decision happened right there with sunlight. Catching dust like glitter the room wasn't ashamed of. Back at her office, the paperwork stacked in a friendly way, short forms, plain English. I wrote the deposit check with the steadiness of someone paying herself first. Move-in date, the 1st of next month. 3 weeks, enough time to leave on purpose, not in a rush. Teresa slid a temporary key across the desk. "Come measure if you want," she said. "Bring a friend to picture curtains." I thought of Kay and her muffins, of how some friends show up without speeches. I initialed where the sticky flags asked me to, then paused at emergency contact. I wrote a name that was not family and felt something like a field replanting after a hard winter. Outside, the wind picked up and set the flags on the leasing sign to flickering. I tucked the receipt into my purse the way you tuck a promise into a safe place. On the ride home, every light turned green. Or maybe I finally noticed. He came back the next day, engine idling like a thought he couldn't finish. I met him at the door but didn't open it. You blocked me, he said through the wood confusion, trying to pass for concern. You changed everything. Yes, I said. A bird chirped somewhere close, like a metronome for my heartbeat. Why the old me would have offered a history lesson and a cake. I offered a sentence, I'm choosing myself. Silence, then a small scoff. Over one bad afternoon, I almost laughed. Our lives are built from afternoons. I kept my hand on the knob steady, the way you hold a lid on a pot that's trying to boil over. Take care, I said, and let the quiet answer the rest. Footsteps, stairs, the car reversed. I stood there another minute, not to savor it. This isn't a victory lap, but to mark it. Some doors don't slam, they settle. This one settled with me on the inside. I trimmed the hedge that had nudged over the sidewalk like an overeager guest, swept the porch where leaves like to choose corners, and changed the burned-out bulb above the door. Not because anyone was coming, because I was leaving, and respect is how I move through rooms even when I outgrow them. The broom made that soft rasp that calms older nerves. A neighbor waved and I waved back, two people tending borders that touch. Inside, I wrapped the spare set of curtains, labeled them for donation, and set them by the door with the good lamp I never quite found a spot for. The house didn't sulk. It shone a little like a face. After a long cry and cold water, I stood at the threshold and thanked it for every winter it held, every summer it remembered. I don't abandon, I conclude. The difference is a blessing you give to places and to yourself. The little cross-stitch in the hallway says, "Peace lives here." And when I took it down, a clean rectangle smiled back from the wall. A shadow of what's been brighter where the frame had guarded the paint. That's how peace works. Sometimes it's clearer where you've protected it. I wiped the glass and wrapped it in a towel, feeling silly and satisfied all at once. On a shelf, I found candles I'd been saving for a dinner that never happened. I lit one right then and let the soft light do what it does, make rooms kinder. Older adults know this alchemy. You don't need guests to justify nice things. You need breath. I set the candle down and looked around at the honest emptiness. Not empty like missing, empty like ready. The wall no longer listed my history to strangers. It listened to my plans. I put the frame in the keep box label straight as a ruler line. Out back, the garden had gone to clover and memory. I knelt joints registering their vote and pressed 3 marigold seeds into the dark soil. Not to bloom for me, I won't be here long enough for that. To mark the spot where something ended kindly. Marigolds are tough little sons. They forgive poor soil and forgetful waterers. I covered the seeds with a palm of earth and patted it the way you settle a child on a church pew. Wind lifted the hair at my neck. Somewhere a screen door clapped. I stayed there breathing, in the mineral smell that always tells the truth. Everything changes. Not everything is lost. I didn't pray with words. I let my hands say it. Then I stood brushing dirt from my knees and looked at the house as if it were an old friend I would mostly see in stories. We waved the house and we knew what we had been. Night arrived soft the way good endings do. I brewed tea and brought the mug to the table with a pen that writes without scratching. The list was short and kind. Call the movers, schedule the utilities, leave the key and a thank you note. I added one more line, stop waiting to be invited. Older women collect invitations like coupons, useful only if you want what's being sold. I don't. I want a chair that fits my back and a life that fits my name. Steam curled from the cup and fogged my glasses for a second. I smiled at the blur. Sometimes clarity is a feeling before it's a fact. I checked the locks, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark on purpose. Letting the house say its quiet goodnight, then I answered with mine. Tomorrow would be busy. Tonight had done its job. I went to bed and slept like someone who finally owns her hours. He showed up again, jaw tight, voice trying for gentle, and landing on irritated. "You're doing all this over one bad afternoon?" he asked, standing in the empty hallway where our family photos used to hang. I kept my hands still at my sides, the way you do when a pot threatens to boil. "Not one afternoon," I said. "A stack of them." He looked past me for props that might support his point. Frames, certificates, anything, but I'd already packed that chorus. "I'm still your son," he said, a phrase that used to untie me. "And I'm still the woman who taught you what care looks like." I answered. I just stopped teaching it with my disappearance. He wanted a scene. I gave him a sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standard. "I'm not deleting you," I said. "I'm deleting my habit of erasing myself." He exhaled like a man who'd met a new rule. The door closed without drama. That was the point. At Charles's office, the printer warmed the air, and the notary stamp thudded like a heartbeat that had finally found tempo. He slid the trust packet across the desk. Slim spine-clear tabs pages that knew who they belonged to. I ran a palm over the cover the way you check a cake for spring. It held. "This sets everything you asked," he said. Steady as a spirit level, I signed the last form with a hand that didn't wobble. Legal language can feel like a maze. Today, it felt like shelves built to hold the weight. We reviewed the flow, me now, my wishes later, no mystery in between. "Keep this safe," he said. It already felt like it was keeping me. I tucked the binder against my ribs right where worry used to sit, and walked out taller in ways no one could measure, but me. I didn't win a prize. I reclaimed a backbone. On the way home, I stopped at the old bakery, where the bell still dings like a memory that refuses to be sad. The girl behind the counter called me ma'am, with warmth instead of distance, and slipped an extra cookie into the bag for being lovely. I took a lemon tart to the car and ate it with the kind of focus people reserve for prayers and test results. Sun pooled on my knees through the windshield, a small blessing I didn't argue with. The crust broke clean. The filling was bright without apology. I used to save treats for occasions that ended with cleanup and quiet disappointment. Today, the occasion was me. I licked sugar from my thumb and laughed at a joke only the steering wheel heard. Grief doesn't cancel sweet. It trains your mouth to notice balance. I threw away the napkin, not the day, and drove home with a taste that matched my decision, clear and enough. At exactly 4:12, the doorbell chose a note that felt like hope with manners. I opened to find Emma hoodie. 2 big shoelaces telling the truth. "Is this still okay?" she asked. A teenager's courage wrapped in a smaller voice. "It is," I said, and stepped aside. In the kitchen, I poured tea and set out banana bread because some habits still know how to serve without erasing. "I want to come back," she said, eyes on the mug. "Just me." The words took the long way through my chest. I didn't rush to make her comfortable with what had been uncomfortable. "Why?" I asked. She swallowed. "I copied them until I missed you." The clock ticked like a metronome for honesty. "All right," I said. "You can come back, but only for the truth. No trading." She nodded once, the kind of nod that starts a bridge. The door behind her closed itself, polite as a new beginning. We sat across from each other, the way old friends do when they're meeting for the first time again. She picked at the crust and confessed in little pieces. "At the library, I saw you and walked past. I know I said not to wound her, but to tell the truth, a chair can hold." I laughed when Mom joked. She added, cheeks warming. "It wasn't funny. I just wanted to belong." Wanting to belong is a language I speak. I didn't absolve her. I thanked her for dialing the words herself. "Thank you for calling," I said, and watched her shoulders lower like blinds in a west window. We talked about school instead of sins, about a cat she hopes for, about how gym class brews stories are currency. Before she left, she asked, "Can I try again?" "Yes," I said, "but we tell the truth when it hurts, and we don't use pie as a passport." She smiled, relieved. "Can I come by Thursday?" she asked at the door, palms folded around the foil-wrapped slice, like a tiny agreement. Just me. I thought about all the years I arrived bearing food as an entry fee, and decided this time the door would take a different currency. "Thursday works," I said. 4:00. We'll make tea and skip pretending." She exhaled one of those deep, squeaky sighs teenagers hate to hear themselves make, and nodded. After she walked down the steps, I stood on the porch and looked at the marigold corner the way soil remembers fingers. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt accurate. Back inside, I wrote, Emma Thursday for Zojo on the calendar. Then I added no speeches. Older adults know when words start solving themselves. You don't have to wring them out. I put the remaining bread in a tin and labeled it like a promise for Thursday. Not a door flung wide. A window cracked for someone who knocked alone. At Charles's, we finished the clause that would send the house out into the world. The way I wish I'd sent myself years ago, purpose-packed paperwork ready. No apology tucked in the envelope. Upon sale distribute 100% to Greenway Women's Shelter, he read back every syllable a stitch. I initialed each corner like I was hemming something that would finally fit. The pen moved without drama. My pulse didn't spike. Sometimes the biggest turn arrives like a good seam, straight, secure, invisible to anyone not looking. I remembered a night decades ago, a thin blanket, a metal bed, the hum of other women's breath. How safety can feel like an answer you'll spend the rest of your life trying to live up to. This is the line, I said softly. This is why. Charles nodded, not as a lawyer, but as a man who understands finished work. The twist didn't explode. It locked into place. I didn't wait for probate or a eulogy. I walked into Greenway with a check that made the director, Denise Harper, hold the counter like it was moving. This will open beds, she said, voice catching, and keep lights on. I thought of how often I'd kept lights on for people who never noticed the bill. That's the point, I said, handing her the binder copy, like a relay baton. She didn't ask for my story. Shelters know better than to assume they deserve one. We stood in the foyer a moment, the way you do when a storm breaks and the room needs a second. To believe the quiet. We'll send a letter, she added. You don't need to, I said. Just use it. On the way out, I passed a corkboard covered with success notes in different handwritings. I didn't pin anything. I don't need to be remembered here. I needed this place to remember others. It will. That evening, Emma arrived with a folded piece of paper hugged to her chest. It's not perfect, she warned, which is how girls are taught to present their hearts. I unfolded a pencil sketch, a chessboard from above. On my side, 2 pieces. On the other, a full set crowding itself. My 2 were winning. She's not done, Emma said, pointing at the woman in the chair, a line drawing with a straight back. She just started playing her game. I didn't trust my voice. I touched the edge of the paper like you test the heat of a pan and nodded. May I hang it in the new place, I asked. Her grin was a porch light flicking on. We found tape and stuck it near the window, where late sun makes pencil lines glow. Some art is a mirror. Some is a map. This felt like both. I hugged her not to fix anything, but to mark what changed. The next morning, I walked to the post office and rented a P.O. box with a number that sounded friendly in my mouth. The clerk explained forwarding. I declined. If they need me, they'll manage, I said, calm as a grocery list. The key was small and certain. I turned it once, felt that tiny resistance given thought about all the doors I'd opened in my life. With hope instead of hardware. On the way home, a breeze lifted the edges of flyers stapled to a pole, Lost Dog Yard Sale Guitar Lessons. The city's bulletin board of need and offer. I slipped the new key onto my ring between the house I was leaving and the apartment I would enter, a little metal truth that said I choose who finds me now. Back in the kitchen, I wrote the number on an index card and taped it inside the cabinet. Not hiding, not advertising, choosing. Ashley arrived in heels built for clicking and a coat the color of polite weather. She didn't wait on the porch. She stepped inside like the script still had her name in bold. We're your family, she began, eyes scanning boxes like evidence. You can't erase us. I poured tea I didn't offer. I'm not erasing you, I said. I'm ending the part where my chair is decorative. She blinked like I'd spoken a language she heard on airplanes. We never asked you for anything. Exactly, I said, you expected. Her mouth tightened. You're punishing Dan. You're confusing Emma. Guilt tried the handle. My new locks held. Emma walked here on her own courage, I said. And Dan is learning gravity. She glanced at the empty wall where our history used to hang and misread it as loss. It was space. When you change your mind, she started. I won't, I said, and opened the door for her exit. Polite, firm, done. After she left, I set the trust binder in the center of the room like a candle in a storm. Paper can be flimsy or it can be a spine. This was spinal. I sat where sunlight reached and read the tabs again, not because I doubted, but because certainty deserves witnesses even if it's just you and a good chair. I thought of all the times I'd proofread invitations that arrived late and smiled on the wrong people. No more. This binder isn't revenge. It's a record of care finely pointed in the right direction. I ran a finger down the edge and felt the same steadiness I feel when I hold a newborn careful present unhurried. Out the window, a delivery truck thumped a package onto someone else's porch. Life continued as it does. Mine did too, but on a table I set and a schedule I wrote. If anyone asks for proof, I'll show them this room standing up. Sandra called mid-morning, the kind of hour when the house is honest, and the kettle hasn't yet earned its steam. Everything's filed and effective, she said, crisp as new paper. I pressed the phone to my ear and felt my shoulders settle like books on the right shelf. No fanfare, just a clean click in the chest ownership of my inches alone. She read back the highlights, revocation, confirmed will updated trust, recorded each item a tile that finally made a floor. From here on, she added, you decide. I looked around at my half-packed rooms and understood the difference between lonely and sovereign. Thank you, I said, simple and full. After the call, I stood at the window and saw my reflection over the street, an older woman who didn't vanish when nobody was looking. I put the phone down, not like something I might need to beg with, but like a tool that had done its work. My name fit again, so did the day. At first, mutual forms waited with the patience of things meant to last. Trina greeted me with that steady nod older women memorize for later. We finished the beneficiary updates, checked every box twice, added alerts like good shoes, sensible, supportive, ready for distance. She stamped the papers, processed a word that sounds cold until you've been ignored. Then it's kindness. I walked 2 blocks to the post office, past a man sweeping his stoop, the way I do mine when I want my mind to quiet. I rented a P.O. box and held the small key like a new sentence. None of this was dramatic. All of it was decisive. Outside, the flag's rope clacked against the pole in a wind that didn't ask permission. I slipped the stamped copies into my folder and felt the tiniest lift under my ribs, like a drawer that finally runs on its rails. You add enough small freedoms and the big ones stop being theory. Emma arrived with store-bought cookies and a magazine quiz titled, Which Flower Are You? We swore we'd answer, honestly, pencils dull, from other people's crossword mornings. Sun pinned itself in stripes across the porch boards, turning crumbs into confetti. We laughed at questions clearly written by someone who'd never been 16 and never been 73. My result came up lilac quiet, persistent, often overlooked. Until the whole yard smells like memory. That tracks, Emma said, mouthful, unbothered by neatness in the best way. Hers was marigold resilient, bright, hard to root out. We circled answers and didn't talk about the backyard or the house or the messages I'd stopped answering. Instead, we let the quiz do what gentle things do, carry us toward truth without tugging. When the wind lifted a page, Emma pressed it down with 2 fingers and grinned. Lilac and marigold, she said. We make a yard. I believed her. Sometimes healing arrives disguised as a silly quiz. Later, over the last cookie, she said it quietly. Dad says you've turned your back on family. The old me would have explained with charts and cake plates. I sipped tea and let the words land without breaking. I turned my face toward myself. I said voice even as the porch rail. Emma watched the street the way teens do when they're learning to listen. He's hurt, she added, almost apologizing for a man who owns his mouth and his choices. Hurt isn't a reason to keep a chair empty for me, I said. We sat in what I used to fear, shared silence that wasn't punishment. The air smelled like cut grass and something sweet we didn't name. A neighbor waved. We waved back. Does this mean I can still come Thursday? She asked. "It means you know where the door is," I answered, and felt the hinge in my chest swing the right way. "We didn't solve a family. We honored a boundary." She pulled a folded paper from her backpack, cheeks pink with the bravery of a gift. "It's just a sketch," she said. I opened it and met the chessboard again, my pieces few, my position strong. "She's not finished," Emma whispered. "She's playing on purpose now." I traced the pencil line of a woman's spine that looked a lot like mine. "May I hang it in the new apartment?" I asked. Emma's smile did that sudden summer evening thing light, where you didn't know you needed it. Really, really. We held the drawing up near the kitchen window, testing where light would catch it, like choosing where to plant something that deserves to thrive. I promised it would be the first thing I taped to a wall, even before a calendar or a clock. "Tell me when it's up," she said. "I'll come see." The future stood still for a second, not demanding, just offering. "Deal," I said, and meant it. On moving day, the truck pulled in with a low hum, not a parade. The men were young and careful, surprised by how few boxes I had and how clearly they were labeled. I tipped too much and didn't apologize. Paying well is a habit I intend to keep. The rooms emptied faster than they filled me all those years, leaving behind rectangles of clean paint where frames had guarded shade. Every house knows how to exhale when you let it. Mine did, and I breathed with it. I walked each room, once palm brushing familiar edges, not to cling to thank. The hallway echoed in a kind way, the way churches do after everyone's gone home. "Good work," one mover said, nodding at my neat stacks. He meant the packing. I took it as a review of the life I was leaving with care. The door closed without drama, keys in my pocket, a new handle waiting. My feet felt lighter than the boxes. I slid an envelope into the top drawer of the nearly bare hall table, a single key and a note. "This house taught me everything. Thank you. Gratitude doesn't require custody." I let the drawer close on a soft track, a sound I'll remember louder than any slammed door. On the porch, I checked the light bulb. I'd replaced the tidy hedge, the way the mat lay flat, without asking for attention. No audience, no witnesses. Just respect mine for a place that held me and for the woman who held it. I locked the door, pressed the wood with my palm one last time, the way you do with a child's shoulder before they cross a street, then walked to the car without looking back. Some goodbyes are best faced forward. At the curb, the marigold corner caught my eye, 3 small promises under the soil. I didn't need them to bloom for me. I needed them to remember I planted them kindly. The new apartment smelled faintly of paint and beginning. Teresa met the truck with a clipboard and that efficient kindness I'm learning to collect. We carried in the essentials: first kettle, 2 mugs, the good lamp. I hung Emma's sketch near the south window where late light turns pencil lines to silver. On the sill, I set the tiny succulent in its cat-shaped pot and whispered, "Let's behave." The room answered with quiet that didn't accuse. The first box, labeled kitchen, emptied like a promise kept spoons that know how my hands work a pan that doesn't stick unless I ask it to. I opened the balcony door and let a small wind rearrange the air. Down below, someone walked a small, opinionated dog. I leaned against the frame and felt my heart take the shape of a room that didn't require performance. This wasn't a reset. It was a rightful next. I cut open the box marked Essentials and laid each item gently on the table. The kettle that sings on time, 2 dresses that fit who I am now. A tin of buttons collected from a lifetime of fixing things that could be fixed. At the bottom sat Frank's letter, folded into its familiar thirds edges, yellowed like book pages you love. I read it again. "If something goes wrong, don't fold in. Stay open. Live with your hands unclenched." I placed the note in the drawer where my medical directives live, not as a relic, but as a matching piece. I boiled water and watched the steam rise steady, a small sermon that never scolds. Standing there, I realized I didn't need to fill shelves to feel complete. I needed only what stood up under use and what spoke to me without shouting. I poured tea into my favorite mug and toasted a simple truth I opened. I stayed open. By late afternoon, the oven had learned my name. Banana bread rose with that familiar dome, the apartment filling with a smell that persuades even hard days to soften. Emma arrived with a gym bruise and a jar of fig jam she declared grown-up jelly. "It sounds like you," she laughed, spreading it thick and not apologizing for crumbs. We ate at the little table by the window and didn't invent topics to avoid the real ones. "Is this what peace feels like?" she asked. "A corner of it," I said. The world still beeped and argued elsewhere. Here a teenager swung her feet, and an older woman remembered hunger as something you can meet with butter and time. When she left, we tucked her dad's rusty bike on the balcony, another project worth finishing. The door clicked gently behind her. My shoulders didn't jump. The quiet stayed warm. Some rooms learn quickly. This one already knew how to hold us. A week later, the call came the sale closed. I didn't drive back for a final performative look. Charles texted funds posted, transfer executed. I walked to Greenway with a cashier's check and the kind of calm you earn. The director, Denise, kept one hand on the counter as if the floor might shift and whispered beds, lights, safety. We didn't hug because not every holy thing wants a witness. She stamped a receipt cleared and slid it to me like a certificate of air. I stepped outside and the day felt ordinary. In the best way, trash truck dog walker, a little wind arguing with a flag. Immediate giving tastes different. It doesn't wait for a eulogy. It feeds a room that's hungry right now. On the walk home, I passed a mother and a girl sharing a grape soda on a stoop. I smiled at how small rescue can look, not hope. Intention moving its feet. Marcia brought crosswords and a story about a bus driver who waited 2 extra minutes. Ida arrived in her fur-trimmed coat, always 2 degrees colder than the rest of us. Nora sent regrets and a torn-out crossword clue. Anchor with a note in looping pen. We kept the tea simple and the cake simpler slices the size of sanity. Nobody asked for a family update. Nobody delivered a lecture disguised as concern. We talked knees and grocery prices and the neighbor who feeds birds like he's running a tiny airport. The room filled up with the sound older women recognize as medicine, non-performative presence. When the conversation dipped, it wasn't awkward. It was full. We washed cups, wrapped 1 extra slice in foil, and promised to meet again next week with the ease of people who mean it. After they left, I stood in the doorway and listened to the apartment holding the echo. Right noise, right place, right time. His handwriting leaned the way it always has, like it wants to sit down, but can't. "I'm sorry," the letter said. "I don't know how to fix this. I might not know how to be the man you deserve. But Emma's braver now, and that came from you." I read it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because old habits reach for a response, the way hands reach for railings in the dark. I didn't write back, not out of anger, out of design. Some repairs need quiet shelves, not quick glue. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, where history sits beside medical, a filing system that tells the truth. I am not pretending. I am not punishing. I am pausing. I closed the drawer and felt the soft catch as it settled. Then I made tea and looked at the sketch on my wall. 2 pieces winning. Some stories continue. Mine for once proceeds on my terms. I used to wait at other people's tables. Now I don't. They ask why I'm still alive. Now I answer to remember my name, to clear my own table, to leave the door open just enough for those who knock with clean hands. The kettle hums, the lilac lamp leans on the floor, and the sketch on my wall, 2 pieces win, remind me that less is not less when you play deliberately. The file folder sits where the centerpieces used to be. 3 marigold seeds sleep in the yard that I blessed goodbye. I will not measure my life by the last person who turned toward me, but by the silences I chose and the rooms that held that silence. If you ever step out of a long silence and choose for yourself, meet me here, tell me one small thing, you still hold 1 door. You gently closed, and 1 person you would welcome back as they were. And if this story appeals to you, stay tuned for more. more great stories.